webinar coming from the org CMF. This one is called the emotional dynamic of an organization, and literally going beyond all that's out there in terms of getting the emotion side right. That is emotional intelligence. It's optimize motivation. So that's me coming from psychology, finance, and so on. With research validated by DCU down here in the corner and funded by Enterprise Ireland. So our company is ODTI. We research, develop, provide tools that organize, help organizations plan and execute incremental transition change and so on and so forth, using this dynamic systems maturity theory, which I have originated. And it literally is, as you'll see, and maybe I've seen in the previous webinar, it is next generation change. That's me, and there we are. That's my background, organizational learning, lots of change management experience, OD and so on. And again, there are supporters. Now you can, this will be posted online, so you can check on that for anything we skip through pretty quickly. But the rationale will be familiar to people from the last day. We have an extraordinary high level of failure rates for change management. And this is consistent since 1965. There's a lot of debate from different quarters about this, but Bernays, 2017, is the Bible, if you like, of change management. And he shows since 1965 this consistent failure rate. And our theory makes it clear that it is the maturity of the organizations that are a problem, not so much the change management. So that's where our focus is. And there they are across all these kinds of interventions. We have these extraordinary failure rates. Also, there's something radically wrong when everyone wants agility and everyone knows there's a premium for it, agility, but only 22% achieve it. And this is also a critical indicator, the likes of Hamill's research, that ties returns to maturity because you know, there's a mindset that says we needn't bother with these things like emotion and agility and so on, but the research is out there. Maturity, as we call it, is tied to higher returns. So 78%, which is an extraordinary thing, of organizations are at or below what achieves these kind of returns. And we'll see this quite graphically in a moment. So what is so radically wrong that is impacting both change management, organization development, mergers and acquisitions, which are actually really designed to be productive and successful, as well as performance, productivity, which is low, etc. Now, I just want to graphically show you this. And this comes from the culture webinar. 51% are trapped in this lower end of our model. And there is an average discount of 500% to the average market returns. And you can see the references for these papers at the end of the presentation. 27% are at around the average and have a bureaucratic culture. And these are the levels of our model that I'm going to show you in a minute, but this is where they tie in with this research done by McKinsey and Hamill in Spain and these people. 27%, so this is our 78% are not where organizations, 22% achieve the higher three levels of our model, which are competitive advantage and leadership, and these average 300% premium, but of course when you get to the leadership level, that's where you get the megabucks returns. So there's something radically wrong. Our model, just a quick shot of it and how this looks. These different levels that I put in that previous graphic, we have, these are definitive terms that are used here. Critical zone, comfort zone, operational competitive advantage, and leadership. These are the levels. So 22% are only making it up to here. That we have a sustainable competitiveness, that's a dynamic learning out in the marketplace, changing as quick as the opposition, embedded with the customer and that kind of thing. So if you haven't seen the model before, this is our diagnostic. This is a tutorial coloring that I have, which I have, you know, is not, yeah, I apologize for it, but it helps in tutorials. These colors mean different things. But anyway, so we have this bureaucratic right up to, this is the bureaucratic level, the operational level, formal operations, process and procedure and so on. So we want to get organizations up to these 3 higher levels, and if possible, to the leadership levels. So we take a diagnostic. Each of these dynamics across here, we call them dynamics because they're grouped forces of construct capabilities. For example, physical resources would maintain to the building, the technology, time management, things like that. They will be the constructs behind physical resources. You can see my cursor pointing it out there. Work would be actually your typical job specification or job satisfaction kind of stuff. Job characteristics theory, actually, sorry. It's feedback, autonomy, those kind of features. Emotion, which we're looking at today, has a dynamic all of its own, and it is analyzed, and we'll see the constructs behind that. And the point is that change management is doomed to failure if you are registering your capabilities in the lower half of the model. There is no traction here for development. This is a critical psychological insight. There's nothing to build agility on. There's nothing to maintain or sustain change. If you're measuring down here and you start with something, I will give you the example. Where this came from was a manufacturing plant that introduced self-directed teams into a culture that was characterized by bullying on the shop floor, embezzlement by management. So in other words, it was actually in this area here, this colorless, lifeless zone down at the bottom. And they wanted to introduce self-directed teams. Well, that's here. That's level 6B. This is organizational advantage. So you can see all of this is missing. So the intervention failed. Whatever discipline was there beforehand with the self-directed team structure evaporated, accidents happened. A big accident happened, the place was shut with a regionally significant loss of jobs. But how could somebody, high-class change management expert, do something so fundamentally ridiculous? Well, we go and answer the question, and we provide the solution in this model. So rationale for the new approach, the answer to the question, what's wrong? It's sticking with simplistic pre-systemic modeling and management of organizations, predominantly linear, which people will be familiar with from the last tutorial, if you like, meaning of linear, that people view things in a straight line, and it's usually a vertical line, unfortunately. So there are power, there's division, dominance, these kind of effects are in people's minds. They rise to power and they take control, but it is a purely bureaucratic level of maturity that they can reach. They can't get any higher than that. So organizations are definitively classed as socioeconomic systems. So we have the technology, the financial stuff, that's the economic side, but the social side is badly missing. Drastic imbalance of attention on both sides of that equation. The socio-emotional is neglected. Okay, so ideas of culture, only a nebulous stuff, and we saw that the last day. Another key insight is that when that linear mindset takes control of an organization, they see socio-emotive issues as lateral. Now, lateral is an approach. It's a horizontal horizon that is the schema for it. And the attitude is really, we got to do something before we do something else. The linear mind does not like that. So we're saying you have to take care of the social emotional stuff before you can get on with the economic stuff. The linear mindset hates that, is antagonistic, and we've discussed that the last day as well. So there's no modeling of organization or socioeconomic system. They're more structural in their formats. No normative model how they should be. No normative model of how they learn and develop or degrade, which the DSMT does. There's no attention given to the other half. Cognition is overweighted relative to emotion, and the two are 50-50 in our human nature. So how can that be right? You know, the limbic system has the hippocampus and the amygdala. Every memory we have, every process we have is weighted by the emotional side. We're 50-50 for both. So how can you neglect half of our nature? The model captures emotion as a motivational dynamic. Now you have something like CMMI and a lot of stuff based on that, these 5 steps of sophistication of process, but that does not engage the motivational dynamic of the emotions. So core functionality of both humans and human systems is both cognitive, wait, now I'm blocking this, sorry about that. But neglect of emotion across theory and practice arose due to paradigmatic. Why is that? That's because the way psychology evolved, it got stuck in the computer age with IT and cognition, and the emotion stuff has been neglected for decades now. And it accounts for all of this. Look, people are depressed in organizations. People are self-destructive in organizations. The embezzlement feature is there. The greed feature is there at the expense of the organization itself. So all the way from that level of emotional up to the dynamic competitiveness. How are you going to energize people to be out there in that third from top level, the first agility level? How are you going to get that if people aren't emotionally on board? And it's essentially the top is out of the question. It is obviously vital for energy that you excite emotion. And that's what the process that we advocate. And when people take the diagnostics and get the reports, they all, every dynamic is exciting the emotional dynamic from start to finish. And many of these other ones have a turn-off effect, because if you neglect human nature, if you neglect stress issues, for example, well, you're going nowhere. So it captures this motivational in its qualitative data, because in answering questionnaires, people get to put in reasons why they've chosen the maturity level that prevails for them. And that qualitative data gives you your starting point for the change of each construct capability. So this also is capturing emotional issues. Now the scope goes beyond emotional intelligence to maturity across the dynamic. We want to look at the change agent, leaders, and the system. And we have the capacity to do that. But let's look at what's out there. Emotional intelligence, the capability of individuals to recognize their own emotions and those of others, discern between different feelings and label them appropriately, use emotional information to guide thinking and behavior, and manage or adjust emotions to adapt to environment or achieve one's goals. Now, these are all worthy skills. They're all absolutely necessary. The problem is that, you know, that doesn't mean that the guy is going to do a good job. They have the skills, self-awareness, self-regulation, social skill, empathy. All right, we'll have a look at these in a bit more detail. The motivation, being aware of what motivates self and others. There are two sides to this construct. Emotional intelligence accounts for 67% of the abilities for this good leader here. That's fine. But also, it's correlated with bullying. So we have both ends of our model. We have this exploitative character, which is coming from the bottom end of our model, and we have this, which would be coming from the higher end of the model. So emotional intelligence is not enough just to have the skills. It is to have the maturity, to recognize the maturity in others, recognize that they are of this higher caliber. Okay. So what is just a quick course on mindfulness, resilience, influence, happiness, empathy. It's going to cost you 99 bucks. But look, it is elemental. You know, you learn these skills, great. You know, what does that mean? You have skills. There's no guiding model of human nature, no modeling of humans and human systems as socioeconomic systems, no operationalizability. These are simply skills. We have the benefit of providing a full system modeling, which I just introduced you to. What do you call it? The graphic with the model. Okay, so here we have Maslow. Maslow covers the range of maturity, if you like. Now, our model wasn't designed on Maslow; it's just that it fits. But because DSMT is a whole system developmental model, emotion pervades every phase and every dynamic, from the lowest levels to the highest levels. So, you know, this is Maslow's idea of a model of a human system, if you like, in terms of its needs and meeting its needs. But we similarly have a full system, except we can apply it to all of the capabilities of the organization, or any system, in fact, be it individual or macroeconomic. So this is just a brief glimpse now for people who might consider we're not true in what we say about the science behind it. That is a quote from one of the reviewers. It is unprecedented in its scientific depth in the organization science field. And that's Maslow on the right-hand side, if you like. That's where his stuff correlates with the stuff from DSMT, on which ORG-CMF is based. But you also have the clusters of personality disorder, defined for the first time according to organizing schemas and not just statistical diagnostic groupings. Freud also is here, makes sense of all of these schools of psychology and correlates to what's out there in organization development, from Greiner, CMI, team, so on and so forth. I can't see what's behind that actually with my, there we are. Out with the model again, to just give you a brief run through. Some of you will probably know this. You're measured according to diagnostic questionnaires, which are weighted averaged to appear on a graphic like this, to show people, to grab them, to grab their attention. We discussed last week about the likes of Apple in its heyday, in the early version of Apple, up to the 1980s, I think it was, of this culture up here with competitive advantage. That's the way things were in Apple. Very creative, very self-expressive, all of the things we associate with this level. But it was missing all of these steps in the interim. It wasn't out there taking heed from the marketplace, which is this competitive zone. It hadn't its process and procedure. And along comes another company that has these responsiveness to the marketplace and passes them by. Okay, let's talk about emotional maturity. Emotional maturity, this guy says, is realizing that emotions can't be avoided. But what could be avoided is creating a fuss. So literally, it's the capacity to take on board increased complexity in integrative fashion. So certainly our COVID situation is providing a lot of complexity. What maturity is a measure of how well we take it on board without cracking up. And I hope you're all at a safe distance from each other. Anyway, so it is grown through experience and learning in instances representative of each phase of the model. So obviously, the higher emotional maturity is the higher end of the model, but you've learned, and you learn from experiencing instances like the lowest level, which is your turnaround, your disconnect, and through the phases, being able to listen, to take on board people's input, to critically lead, to onboard people emotionally, do the process and procedure. If you've gone through all of these, this is building up your emotional maturity. The framework looks like when you do the diagnostic and you get your reports. This is what the operational graphic looks like. And you can see emotion is highlighted as one of the dynamics. And the constructs behind the emotion dynamic itself are stress, personal control, power and influence, morale, and attitude. So in its own right, emotional maturity is measured for your organization. Now, this is a graphic of all construct capabilities that are behind each of the dynamics that we saw in the other graphic. So, like I said, the physical resource, we have our building and facilities and so on. But you can see personal as a dynamic. Can you see it there? You have interpersonal. You have management leadership. These are all picking up on emotional product. I mean, it's good for your CV and all that kind of stuff. So these are the dynamics, the forces as we described them before. Now we can have diagnostics at each of these levels. We can have a diagnostic. You just want a quick shot, kind of a triage thing, to get a grasp of the overall organization. That's a one shot. You take that. That's a simple questionnaire. Slightly more complex, but I think there's only 15 questions in it to get one for each dynamic, and then you get into these 5 or 6 points of data entry for each dynamic going on. Okay, so we want to build up this. We want to see how emotion is captured This is a model of human nature that it is based on. So we want to see how it captures the emotional end of development and change. So the lowest level, the first level of change management is this disruptive phase. So obviously we need the emotional maturity of the change, but we're going to deal with that later. But this is about education and sedition, right? This is about motivating the desire for change within people. So you're picking your people, your change agent or leader has to go around seeing who's on board with the message, who was dissatisfied already, that kind of stuff, among critical people. Assessing prevailing natural narratives, so listening to conversations. There's a lot of stuff in change management about narratives. You know, what are the issues out there? How are they feeling about things? Developing informal channels and meetings. These are all emotional awareness. Now, shrewdly positioning key components for the disorienting dilemma. Now, this is the start of all learning. You get no learning if you don't get this. You get no change if you don't get this. The disorienting dilemma. That point where you say, I am disoriented by this crazy situation. No, this can't go on. We have to change. And you get it at your gut level. This is totally an emotional reaction. And if you don't get the emotional reaction, you are going nowhere. That is what leads to decisiveness. It's the same for an addict. Unless there is this disorienting dilemma, the person will not change. It's the same for an organization. So the objective diagnosis, if you showed Apple their maturity in their previous existence, you had grabbed them. They were caught below the waterline. They were not what they thought they were, and they might have done themselves a lot of good that way. Oh, sorry. I want to keep an idea for people who have maybe not been through this before. There is a habituation or degrading occurs in organizational systems, and if there is habituation at this level, that's what it looks like. It's exploitation and aggression. We won't spend too long on that. This idea here of shrewdness is a critical emotional feature for change leadership. And the truth is, if you don't have shrewdness, you're in trouble. You need to be aware of undercurrents. You need to know when to speak, when not to speak, who to speak to, and so on and so forth, and play the politics. Okay. The second phase is our disconnect phase, and I've taken this iconic image. This line in the sand is critically important in this phase. You have to create this. You have to cross this line. We have to disconnect from our previous existence. It is the same for an addict as it is this line in the sand, the emotional detachment. We are no longer that person, and there is no sustainable change otherwise. We are no longer that team. We are no longer that organization. And if you don't get that sense, then you're on shaky ground for your change management. This is from the Alamo, of course, and that's Travers drawing the line across which people crossed. So we want this critical network that we're building, that we have canvassed the people that look like they're going to be the what we call the critical network, representative of different areas of the organization, the stakeholders, and that is an emotional capture. You're capturing the emotional dynamic of the organization in these people. Now they also have to have competence, so that's the golden formula to have high competence and emotional maturity and credibility. These are the people who are going to lead your change management process. And of course, if you get habituated in your disconnect phase, well, depression and obsolescence, I'm afraid. Next phase is 1C, is the incubation phase, and this is about collective planning. So you've got these number of representatives that have crossed the line. Yes, we need to change, and we will commit to doing the thing right, and so on and so forth. And this is what it looks like, incubation. You're in this period where you may still be attached to a customer that's given you grief, but you've made an emotional detachment and you're going to look for other customers. Same with product, same with technology, same with whatever. So the formal meetings are managed through both mature intellectual and emotional capability. Now this is obvious. You know, you have to be emotionally aware. You have to be as emotionally mature about it as you can be. That goes without saying. but it also depends on selection and preparation of the team. This is critically important. And our next webinar will be on rebuilding after the COVID. And, you know, this is a critical point of this, that your rebound team is well picked as well. Habituation is insulation and dependence. That happens a lot of organizations, paralysis by analysis, as they say. Now, the next level is level 2, and we have critical singularity. So regardless of construct capability, there is a strong emotional dimension here. Now, this one is leader. This woman is leading with the flag. It's like the French icon. What is that? Freedom or victory or whatever. Sorry about that. All right, but the singularity could be, as I said, the product, you know, and so on. It could be your customer. So anyway, there has to be a strong emotional dimension. The leader has to be this critical regenerative stability zone. Now we'll talk about the regenerative leadership, which is at the higher level, but you want to get that kind of a person down in amongst the troops at this level, re-energizing people in this critical situation. And they have this sense of stability about them, even though they are quite energized and exciting change. The totem win as an assurance of change with your product or your customer. You know, we can put up a flagship. This is another critical singularity. But these have emotional effects. They are like a flag in the woman's hand. They stand as a totem to rally the troops, as it were. Okay, but unfortunately, a lot of leaders, when they get into this position, they go on to, they love crisis, they hold on to crisis. This is the kind of a linear mindset. If they get into this position, they'll keep the organization at this chaotic level and maintain a simple bureaucratic control over the system. Critical divergence, this comes down to delegation to your critical network. So the leader has gone out, he's been the critical leader, he's taken accountability for the plan, he's taken visible accountability for it. Now it's a delegation, if it in the behavioral constructs anyway, it is a delegation to the critical network. It is also, if it's a product related capability we're looking at kind of this opportunism that I've captured here. And you won't get the dynamism, you won't get the energy unless this delegation goes well, unless these critical network people are visible, walking the talk as the leader hopefully is from his critical leadership positioning. That is going to create your dynamism, the excitement, and so on. Now, of course, it must be representative of all stakeholders. And if you get stuck here, I'm afraid it is quite chaotic, and I've given some outlines of what that looks like in my previous webinar, where they get stuck in the opportunistic phase and never get to formalize things. Now, here we are at the level, and I highlight this graphic again to show the green level. This is the one that is dedicated entirely to the socio-emotive level of the growth, change, developmental process. So it is based on homeostasis and equilibrium. Definitively, it is divided between stable and unstable equilibrium, but it is dealing with the socio-emotive dimensions of human nature that must be learned. You're going to go nowhere if you haven't addressed these issues in your change process. So your critical network are on board. If they're representative of all of the people of the organization, then they are now engaged in selling it. This is the onboarding phase. This is going out doing your workshops, your communication cycles, whatever it may be. You're engaging the people, and you're engaging all the social and emotional issues. And if you don't do that, you needn't bother going to the next layer of training, which is training. Who's going to be interested in training if people are suffering stress and other emotional problems with their roles? It's not going to happen. So resolve your social issues, put in your social supports, generate a sense of collective trust. Now, this is an important point. I mean, if there's training to be done around these emotional and social issues, it must be experiential. If you want to train people in trust, you don't learn that from a book, you learn it from experiential learning. And there's lots of team exercises that are designed to generate that impactful, disorienting dilemma where people learn what it is like to trust, and more importantly, they learn how easy it is to lose trust. Okay, and habituation here, as we saw the last day, is actually a socialist culture. It won't go any higher. This is the problem with habituation. It won't get into the next phase, which is emotions. Above the social is the emotions. People lose their emotions. They become quite bland in that kind of a culture. They do not have the protection of law. Development is not a feature for them, which is at our next level. They're not dynamic in the world. They're certainly not self-expressive, and they have no capacity for regeneration. So that's a clear example of what has not worked in the past. And it degrades to the lower levels of authoritarianism and so on. Okay, so the destabilization, which is 3B, we have this stable, unstable equilibrium. We're bringing it to this now. We are exciting a bit of change. We've got the people on board. We're not taking them totally out of their comfort zone, but we're creating instability. Now, interestingly, if we look back, this is where our world at the moment, we are all in stabilization. We are all in this equilibrium. We are being supported. We're in a niche kind of setting, if you like, to a degree. But how are we going to come out of that? Well, it's very important we get it right. We go to this next level, which is the destabilization level, and we don't go back to the chaotic level. That is a critically important feature of breaking out of the way the world is now in our COVID situation. Sorry. So destabilization, resolve the emotional issues, resolve fear. Resolve fear. Can you imagine? We have to resolve fear about the virus, fear about loss of this, that, and the other. These are real issues. We have to provoke. We have to challenge people. That's what this destabilization is about. We have to give them goals, and we can't do all this together. And the COVID exit will be the same. We need to pilot, and you have to decide in piloting: are you going to pilot for success or learning? If you pilot for where you expect success, you're not going to learn that much. But if you pilot where you expect success, you're going to get people on board. So choosing within boundaries, okay. And as I said, it's the first phase of reopening economies, and it needs to be got right. And habituation here is a horrible place to be. It's very frustrating. And empathy, this idea, people who habituate at this level, they always highlight empathy, and empathy can be an overpowering and negative effect in judgment. It's not always right by any means. Our next level of the model is operational. So it's on concerned, it is particularly around the idea of assertiveness. So we've dealt with the serious emotional issues with people. We might have done a bit of training in trust in workshops and stuff like that, but these are the critical level playing fields that people understand the behaviors of assertiveness and how they're going to be supported in fair procedure, how meetings are going to be conducted, and so on. So at this level, we need to run programs to raise emotional intelligence, but now we have the right to do it. We have created the right to ask people to learn the skills of emotional intelligence. And we need to train them for emotional maturity as well. We have earned the right to engage them in the developmental process. That is stipulated by this process that we're in, the ORG-CMF. Up to this point, it have been mostly the critical network and your leaders. They've engaged the people, but now we are in the training setup mode as a basis for proceeding. We've already mentioned the experiential learning, okay. But people must learn these things like trust for the higher levels of our model. Teamwork, collaboration, and other agile level behaviors, there are an awful lot of them that require high degrees of understanding of trust. Our next level is formalization. Okay, so we give people contracts and we have company setups. All of these formalized legal support, they take a great deal of stress from people in terms of their relationships to what they're doing. Structural support, process and procedure support, all of these things are critical to get people to emotionally commit. Fairness, transparency, that the managers are going to be held to account, that discipline, that the leader is going to have discipline. Bureaucracy, bureaucracy, if you get stuck here, it's bad, but it has to be there for agility. So you have to have this mix of linear, lateral, and integrative mindset, and hopefully everything is in an integrative process. Habituation here is your bureaucracy, I'm afraid, and we've seen 78% of organizations only make it this far. So competitiveness, and now we are into a definitively complex adaptation. This is dynamic learning. This is your customer engagement. We have a certain amount of internal fitness for purpose up to this point. Now we are engaged in learning dynamically from the customer. So you can see a model that's out there of this kind of competitive dynamics. So motivation and capability to respond is the critical thing. Competitive action, likelihood of competitive, and the cycle goes on. Now, this is a critical point in agility. This is your basis of agility, to get this right, that we are responding to what the market wants, that we're not living like Apple were in their own creativeness. So emotionalism in motivation of dynamic learning from engaging the customer. So people have to be switched on. And boy, oh boy, people can be switched off by change management that doesn't get everyone on board. Okay, emotional intelligence is critical, customer care skills, and who's going to say that this isn't about emotion, about hearing what the customer is saying? It's absolutely vital that you are emotionally in tune with the dynamics of the marketplace. And again, assertiveness, to ensure that everyone needs to be a part of this. And they have this very much in tourism. Partner in Brazil was telling us how he was involved. I was involved in one myself, where you have ambassadors around the region that are, you know, the guy at the petrol pumps, he's meeting a tourist driving in the car, he's an ambassador for the region. And that has to be the same for a company. Everybody is in the learning process. Everybody is representing the company, but everyone is gathering information. So we have what's called in that last point, systemic environmental scanning. But it's no good if the person isn't assertive and will report that to whatever level it needs to be reported to. So this is a critical dimension and strength of this dynamic learning. Now, only 22% make it to this maturity or higher, and we've seen that, okay, that point has been made before. But how do we sustain this? So we capture dynamic learning process. This is called double loop learning, changing the goals and process of experience, and that is, you know, you've got to be happy with your change, and this is requiring a good deal of emotional maturity, that you learn from what's out there, what's happening, but you capture it, that is not lost. And a lot of stuff that's been learned with organizations now, they need to capture it for the new normalcy that will be after, well, when we get out of this COVID mess. Customer care has to be embedded in the culture. You learn it, you change it with your dynamic involvement with the marketplace, but you've got to embed that learning process. Your complex organization can only be really effective if you are everything in place up to this point. If there's anything missing from beneath, and especially your soft skills. You have to have soft skills to manage complex organization, even something as matrix, and this is highly researched, there's no doubt about that. Right, level, the innovation required particular level of emotional maturity captured in self-expression. Are you going to be open? Are you going to be saying what's on your mind in meetings and you know, in strategy and so on and so forth? Are you going to be like groupthink, which will be down at our critical leader level? You get stuck there, that's groupthink. This is very different. We need everybody excited and expressing themselves, saying what's on their mind. You know, so to let go, to explore possibilities and be open-minded and forceful in uncertain circumstances, for example, the unknown. And we'll come to this in a minute, the idea of aggression being bad. Aggression is not bad. Predatory aggression is bad, but defensive aggression, as we'll see, and is required at this advantage stage. And you will have anecdotes of that, people really getting excited and hammering the table and all that kind of stuff. It is required. It is required to make breakthrough at this level and get your point across. Organizational advantage is our next level. So this is self-organization, self-directed teams, collaboration, and anyone who's been involved in collaboration will know that, again, you are at high level soft skills, especially at remote learning. And we need to bring that in anymore, I suppose, because companies are going. Capgemini said, the CEO, the incoming CEO yesterday, said 50% of their workers will be working from home in future. So that's a world that's with us. We need heightened soft skill awareness to deal with people at remote, in remote structures. We need high levels of maturity all round, and that kind of speaks for itself. We are looking at a different order of need for maturity in organizations to make a success of this working from home structuring. So it's about embedding the process and the discipline, and you know, it's not an easy balance to maintain the discipline of these levels of self-direction and the openness and soft skills and so forth. Now, integrative leadership this is our highest level, 7 leadership. So integrative leadership is somewhat captured. This is something I got, icon I got from just Googling integrative leadership, and see what they put right in the middle. Emotional intelligence. Well, I would put emotional maturity to capture emotional intelligence as well as what the DSMT provides. So you have stress management, self-perception, self-expression, the interpersonal stuff. What's core to this is the emotional maturity to make it work. So what is it like, integrative leadership? Well, follower trust is implicit. You know, you just open the can of, what is it, Tropicana or any of these cartons, and you just put it to your mouth and drink it. The trust is quite implicit. So brand power is important. And this is quite an emotional, what happens when you break that? You know, what happens if you get poisoned with one of these things? That trust is gone. And it is the same with any capability that you're looking at. This integrative leadership is a precious thing. You've got to maintain that emotional bond. So the ability to take on board all points of view in a constructive manner. Okay, win-win relationships. You've got to do that. They're not actually, as we saw the last day, it's not 50-50. It's a win-win that your client is happy, your customer is happy, your staff are happy with to go on with. And purposeful leadership, another feature of integrative leadership. So high levels of emotional intelligence and maturity. Well, that's kind of obvious. Okay. Now the point is, though, that our questionnaires and our instructions, they capture all of this stuff, and they capture it in sequential manner. So we can check what's missing, what needs to be put in. No other approach does this. Regenerative leadership is the highest level, and this is an icon that I like. It's off the internet, and it just captures that the bottom of their red zone there is exploitation, and that is exactly what the model shows. At one end, we have leadership companies that exploit situations. They milk the situation, and at the higher end, we have this that regenerates. It creates new people. These arrows are pointing up. This is fulfillment. This is spawning new people. Actually, regenerative leadership takes in parenting, spin-offs of companies and so on, whereas the other, exploitation, is putting people down, as you can see. So it can be defined as a singularity that reflects all levels of learning. And this is, I hope to do a webinar on leadership because it's quite different than what's out there, you know, authentic leadership and those kind of things. I mean, now we can look at leadership in terms of having learned the lessons of all of these levels of the model. Now, if you've learned these lessons and that's what you're bringing to your leadership, that is a powerful leadership. It is also a powerful change agent psychology. So this is the graphic that our model looks like. Again, I just want to draw attention that we are into a scientific model here. This is important. There's no other scientific model out there that has scientific theory underneath it. Those Greiner, DSMT, they're all based on some level, some notion of of evolution for Greiner, CMI, sophistication of process. There's no scientific theory of learning and development behind them. This is the only one. So this is, you know, this is quite something to be able to say, but there we are. And of course, I just want to highlight that even though it is embedded in all this, the phases and all the dynamics and all the constructs, it does have this critical point that Maslow highlighted, that we have needs. We have this emotional need before we go on to what Maslow would have called the rational and the self-actualization, which I showed you our model captures around here. So in emotional intelligence and emotional maturity in the change process, just a quick snap, to read the politics, know who the customer is. And boy, if you've been in OD situations like I have, you know, make sure you know who the customer is. It might not be the guy who hired you. Get to know the stakeholders, be reactive. This is it, the ability to engage critical people through emotion connection, organize the critical network to leverage the systemic change. You won't do it on your own. Listen to the narrative, all that kind of stuff, and diagnose the maturity and culture of the system to map the current ceiling. We've talked about that. That's what the model does. You do your diagnostic, that's where you're at, that's your starting point. And okay, and if you don't do it like that, you have no traction. Okay, so I've got some couple of graphics here to show how this process plays out in its proper sequence: the motivating the critical network, organizing the disconnect, facilitating the critical network in planning, development of the capability, moving on to your leader taking accountability, delegating, and here we come with our socio-emotional stuff, onboarding the people, managing the issues, get onto the operational learning, your training, get onto the process procedure, get onto your customer, work it all out with the customer, get yourself in your self-organization. You have to empower people, and that's where empowerment occurs. Empowerment occurs here at this high level. A lot of stuff that I read is really empowering at the delegation stage. You know, you have to go through your onboarding, your support, and your dynamism before you can really empower people. And you can't ask them to be part of a self-organized team if they're mum, if they're quietened in any way. They have to be into their self-expression and so on. And finally, the leadership we've just discussed. The emotional maturity of organizations, the disruption is degenerative. The organizations get stuck in these things. You know, leadership can form this corrupt center and have a shielding around it. And you see that very, very obvious in some national political situations, particularly through history, where your exploitative leader was surrounded by people who were in the mix, and he had to stay with them, because if he didn't, they'd kill him. All right. So inertia, disconnect from the marketplace, obsolescence, and so on. Failure to launch. A lot of creative companies get stuck here. Groupthink we've talked about. Mentoring, which is creating mimics of people. It's not the regenerative stuff. It's not new people coming up. Stabilizing the socialist culture, niche bound, symbiotic relationships. I spoke about that the last day. Company providing to a main client becomes shaped by that client. There's a symbiotic relationship that holds them at this level, and people just go crazy. As I said, I've worked this model on that situation, and quite successfully. Formal operations, fair process, get stuck to that's your bureaucratic, your competitiveness, that's fine, but if you don't move above that, you're going to degrade to your contest, which is your chaos level at level 2. The organizational advantage, we've just discussed that. So, but you've got to move beyond that. You've got to take charge of your marketplace. If you don't, that's not good. And there's even the context in which Apple are stuck with their singularity, their product, tons of, don't they buy? Why don't they move to the regenerative level and do the M&A, do the buy growth, rather than sticking with their product? There is a question mark over that strategy. Now, look, we want to analyze people, your change manager, your change agent, your leader. We have a quick brief look at emotional complexity. So we have to be aware of this, be aware of linear and lateral bias in emotion. Empathy is a critical thing. You'll get somebody who is habituated around empathy. It's important for them. You know, you're going to get stuck if that is the case. We have to move beyond that level. So emotions themselves are neither good nor bad. This is an important thing that's not brought out by linear analysis. Aggression can move from predatory to defensive aggression. They even have different neurological systems. One is evil, the other is not. And there is even in sacred text calls for arms, and people don't understand it. A linear mind does not understand that, the difference between good and bad aggression. Love is the same. Narcissistic love is love, but sociopathic love is love, but also is regenerative love, which is your ideal parenting approach. Only DSMT details this range. All of this is captured in our model. So the greater emotional complexity is correlated with a host of positive psychological outcomes such as greater resilience, lower stress, emotional regulation, well-being, but we can redefine emotional complexity now. Emotional complexity is related to emotional maturity. This was very heavy in the psychological thesis that was reviewed and is in preparation for publication. So we want to capture these things, we want to understand this when we're as change agents, as leaders, and when we're involved in the field. So we have to be aware of these kinds of bias as change agents and leaders. And the people we choose for our critical network, we have to be aware of the emotional biases that they will show. So at our lowest level, narcissism, where's that going to get you? You know, we have narcissistic leaders that can be good for critical situations, but they're not good for the long run. You know, the disconnect, we have people that get bogged down in emphasis on pruning. If you see that with a change agent, and it does happen. We have to change this, we have to change that. You have to keep your focus on growth. A lot of people don't have that. Failure to launch, thwarted by perfection. There's a lot of people who are thwarted by perfection in planning, and they lose the opportunity to grow. The critical singularity, well, we've seen that before, the dominance and control. If your change agent leader is like that, you're limiting your prospects for growth. And I have here now put in Myers-Briggs type indicator because there is a bias here and it's always going to be there. This linear lateral we talked about the last time. We all have these biases. There's nothing we can do about them. But maturity is about growing through where you would be most at home emotionally. You've got to grow through these levels and move to the higher levels of agility and leadership and so on. So again, you know, at our level 3, this is the socio-emotive level. We have social conscience, empathy, and all that, and they can thwart the economic imperative that's behind organizations. We need to watch out for that. I've seen people a couple of times involved in screening executives, warn companies about these kinds of people. In some cultures, that's not good at all. Destabilization, emotion, agitated, but unmanaged thwarts the emotional and economic imperative as well. Operational learning, development for its own sake, and there are people who just get stuck in that, again, neglecting the emotion or the economic imperative. Bureaucratic, well, we've talked about that at good length. There's a neglect of agility, and I'm running out of time. These are features of individuals that need to be addressed when you're making your team. Try and get them at the higher level. Try and be the higher, represent the higher levels yourself as leaders. Now, this is just a graphic that shows you sample configurations for our platform. You can choose for agility, innovation, productivity, teamwork, operation effectiveness. You can choose from the different dynamics to make up specialized programs for whatever focus your change management has. So to conclude, prevailing doesn't work. Immaturity of organizations and immaturity of the modeling, whatever the purpose, be assured, the most mature scientific model is best equipped. This is what we have. Engage your staff through diagnostic and developmental process for socio-emotive onboarding. Right? They've made their choices. They've given you the qualitative data. React to that. Get that going. They're engaged. Diagnose the change capacity and use the qualitative data to optimize traction. Prescribe integrative normative developmental process for sustainability. And as we saw the last day, to boost that redefined culture, we've redefined culture now as habituated level of maturity. We have the capability to boost that culture, which no other program has, and we achieve a redefined agility, which is redefined as the 3 higher levels of maturity. And also, quite critically, we can inoculate the system against degradation. It should have systemic, what's called graceful degradation, that if you lose your competitive advantage, you still have your competitive level. If you've built the thing properly, you will not catastrophically degrade. Okay, so there's our references, if you want to look them up. Our next webinar is the 20th of May. It is Organizational Rebuilding After COVID-19, Agile Normative Process through the Dynamic Systems Maturity Theory. It really gives you a roadmap. You won't be able to do it all at once, but it gives you a roadmap. You can check where you are in the process to fill in, to do parallel. You won't be able to bring